Back to 7th Circle Gaming. Today we're discussing the game Torment, Tides of Numenera. And we'll start off as we always do here with disclosures. Pause the video at this point and read them more closely, either way, or we'll just move right along to a screenshot from early in the game. This is from the first town that the player wakes up in, and what we see is a couple of things. There's an alien creature of some sort in a cage. You've got a user interface on the bottom left and the bottom right with a few icons that, with a little thought, we can kind of roughly guess what they are and what they're going to do. And that's really it here, so let's move on to immersion. Now, as we just saw, the game is presented in an isometric view. There's no rotating the map left or right, and that can create some difficulties, but we'll get into that later. The game attempts to immerse players into its world with the presentation. As we just said, it's an isometric view into a techno-fantasy steampunk world that players that are already familiar with science fiction genres like Star Wars, Terry Pratchett's Discworld, or Warhammer 40,000 are going to be more able to relate to that than others. The game also attempts to immerse players into the world with agency. There is an ability to define their character at the start of the game, and through in-game actions, although the appearance of the character remains largely static, apart from wearing different articles of clothing. The game will also attempt to immerse players into its world with story elements, and almost every character on the screen in that little town that we just saw, or town square, is going to have something of a story to them or some line of text to read. And so it is immersive in that way. There is not an awful lot of audio in the game. More important lines are voiced, less relevant lines are not. So it really doesn't earn a lot. It doesn't earn any credit for audio immersion. But what about difficulty? Well, difficulty, the game has earned a 1 out of 15. There really are no settings as such to adjust. How difficult or easy the game is seems to be based largely on the choices that the player makes. Whether they are more combative, more talkative, can define, and what skills and abilities they choose to take will make the game easier or more difficult. So, for that reason, the game is just earned by default a 1 out of 15, since there really isn't anything to discuss. So, let's move on to Lasting Appeal. For Lasting Appeal, the game has earned a 2 out of 15. It does seem, from all of my playthroughs, that short play sessions seem to be the most optimal. One of the most interesting things that I've found in the game is trying the character creation scheme that the game has multiple times to create a certain character, or seeing what all is available in the game for creating characters. Because the character creation is going to be driving some of the early game interest and keeping the player playing through it. Now then, by the by, just to bring it up, there is no downloadable content, and the game does not support mods, before we forget to mention that. So, what about the final analysis? Where does the game stand? The game has earned a 2.3 out of 15 as an average score. Now, I will caveat this next statement as highly subjective. I personally really do find the character creation to be really interesting, and the abilities are diverse as they can be. Personally, I must have gone through the game about 20 different times, and I've only created a similar character twice. The audio is somewhat limited, so don't expect to be listening to a lot of the game. Put on a podcast or something in the background. The immersion is somewhat limited, and from all of my experience with the game, we did try it with a keyboard and mouse and also with the gamepad, but just as a recommendation, you do use the Xbox gamepad if you do have one. The DualShock 4, whether it was with the native detection or with DS4 Windows, it did have some issues with that. So reach for the Xbox gamepad if you really are going to try to play it with the gamepad. And if you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you very much for doing that. Do the other YouTube things. I do welcome suggestions, and on the screen now you'll be able to see a partial list in no particular order of the upcoming games on the channel. And that's all we've got to say for today. Goodbye.